Hey there, creatives. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Creative Psychotherapist Podcast. I'm your host, Raina Lombardi, and I'm really happy that you keep tuning in each week. And today I am excited to share with you another episode 15 of the Voices from the Expressive Therapies Summit special series for 2021. And today you'll be hearing a conversation I had with Dr. Jamie Marich, who holds multiple clinical counseling licenses. She's a registered expressive arts therapist. She's also a yoga trainer. Um, and she specializes in EMDR. And she's the creator of something called Dancing Mindfulness. And that is the basis of our conversation today. And of course, we talk a little bit about EMDR as well, as she's written a number of texts about that therapeutic modality. And if you're interested, Jamie is going to be teaching about her dancing mindfulness approach online through the summit. And that is going to be on November 20th, 2021. And so there's still time for you to register for that if you're interested. And you can do that by heading over to the summit site, which is www.expressivetherapiesummit.com. And I hope you all enjoy listening to the episode.
The Creative Psychotherapist is the official podcast of the Creative Clinicians Corner, a practice-building resource for creative psychotherapists. TCP Podcast is the cast for creative, expressive, and experiential-focused psychotherapists curious to learn how to design, build, and scale a thriving private practice. Your host, Raina Lombardi, interviews successful therapists about the tools and strategies they have used to develop creative, focused practices. They also talk about the products, services, and side hustles they have developed using their knowledge and creativity to enhance their therapy practices, make a greater impact in their communities, and diversify their income streams. Welcome. Now here's your host, Raina Lombardi.
Thanks so much for listening to the Creative Psychotherapist Podcast. I'm your host, Raina Lombardi, and I'm delighted to welcome my next guest. They are Jamie Marich. Jamie has a PhD, licensed in several areas for counseling and supervision. They're registered expressive arts therapist, also a registered yoga trainer, and they travel internationally speaking on topics related to EMDR therapy, trauma, addiction, expressive arts, and mindfulness, while maintaining a private practice and online education operations, the Institute for Creative Mindfulness, in her home base of Warren, Ohio. She is the developer of the Dancing Mindfulness approach to expressive arts therapy and the developer of yoga for clinicians. Jamie is the author of numerous books, including the popular EMDR Made Simple, Trauma Made Simple, and Process Not Perfection. She is the co-author of EMDR Therapy and Mindfulness for Trauma-Focused Care and Healing Addiction with EMDR Therapy, a trauma-focused guide, which will be out later this year from Springer Publishing. North Atlantic Books published a revised and expanded edition of Trauma and the 12 Steps in the summer of 2020. And they're also publishing The Healing Power of Jiu-Jitsu, a guide to transforming trauma and facilitating recovery and dissociation made simple, both due out in 2022. Jamie is a woman living unapologetically with a dissociative disorder, and this forms the basis of her award-winning passion for advocacy in the mental health field. For more information on how to connect with her and her work, you can check out her website, which is Jamie, Jamie, Marich, Marich.com. And we'll be learning more about where else you can find her and her work as we have this conversation. So thank you so much for being here today, Jamie.
My great pleasure. Thanks for having me, Raina.
So, how long have you been in doing the work of therapy? You've written a lot, and of course you have credentials in a variety of areas. How long have you been practicing?
In some form in the human services, about 20 years now. And I came into this field completely through the back door. When I was an undergraduate student, I hated psychology. I took one prereq in it and was like, this is not for me. My background actually is in English and the humanities, the performing arts, history. So I've been on stage or engaged in expressive practices all my life. And what happened was from 2000 to 2003, I lived in Bosnia Herzegovina, specifically Herzegovina, the Croatian part of the country, and my family's Croatian. And I did aid work there a few years out from the fall of Yugoslavia and the war that ensued. And two very interesting things happened for me when I was serving there. One was I was teaching English primarily as my job. And I found that it was expressive practices like dancing and music and drama that
Mm,
was a much more effective way of teaching English than doing worksheets and lessons, especially when you were working with such a traumatized group of folks. And I also had the good fortune of being mentored by an American social worker who helped me not only on my own personal recovery and helped to identify a lot of what was happening with me as the after
mm-hmm,
effect of trauma, but she also really helped me learn the art of working with traumatized children. And after a while, she suggested I come back to the US and do graduate school in counseling. And I kind of laughed at her, saying, I didn't even like psychology. And she said, I've seen the work you've done here over the last several years, and I really think you're going to like it. So
mm.
that's how this all started.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was not what I was expecting at all.
Uh,
Yeah, it's so interesting to see how people end up in the expressive arts therapies.
mm-hmm.
It's usually not so much the interest in being a therapist per se. It's more that connection, that personal connection and meaning making that
Right.
occurs from the expressive outlets.
Yes, and then another funny story connected to that. I don't know if it's funny or sad, but I will tell it anyway that when I was engaged in my first graduate internship at an adolescent residential unit, I had a supervisor who I would describe as too burned out to care. And she said, "Oh, you sing songs, you dance dances, you write. Do some of that with the kids." So I was really beginning to engage in expressive work with my training as an artist and as a performer, not really having much therapeutic training with it other than the basic therapy training I was getting in graduate school. But that lit a fire under my butt to continue to study that further and to work that into my therapy practice further. And I personally don't see how any therapist does their work without some kind of expressive engagement. It's
Mm.
just a total game changer for me.
Yeah, there's so much potentiality to come out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Relational work that comes out of it, but then the intrapersonal work and insight that comes out of it. I agree, but I'm biased.
Mm-hmm.
and in that I'm an expressive arts therapist too. And so that just makes most sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So obviously that kind of led you into the world of EMDR, that focus on trauma.
Yeah. And EMDR was really the personal angle is what got me into EMDR because I knew having been the kind of teacher that I was, that expressive practice would be a part of my therapeutic identity 100%. And it was also when I was working at that adolescent residential center that a coworker of mine essentially intervened on me because he noticed that I was dissociating quite heavily. And
Mm.
when we explored it a little bit, it was not just, it really wasn't the kids that were triggering me. It was the way I saw systemic practices treating the kids, like the medical system, like child protective services, the legal system, feeling like we're just medicating these young people to death instead of actually helping them with their very obvious wounds. And yeah, that was recapitulating a lot for me
Mhm.
inside about how kids are treated, and some remnants of my own story that I hadn't really even begun to touch. So I went to a graduate professor of mine for a recommendation, because you see, I was in this place of I didn't know what kind of therapy would help me further, because I had
Mm.
been engaged in so many other different, more cognitive models at that point, but obviously some expressive work, some a lot of 12 step. But she recommended me to a therapist who did a lot of things that she described as alternative, and one of them was EMDR therapy. And it was the absolute game changer on my mental health. I mean, hands down. So much so that I knew I had to offer this to my patients. And so I got trained pretty quickly after graduate school. And then I began slowly integrating it into my work. But then I soon did my doctoral dissertation on it. I now teach it. I'm a trainer. I'm a pretty well known writer in EMDR. Yet my great passion really does remain blending EMDR with expressive arts therapy, because I find them to be
Mhm.
just an amazingly potent combination.
It makes me think what I know you for isn't EMDR, it's the dancing
Mm-hmm.
mindfulness.
Yeah.
That's how I've always just kind of thought of you in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I'm wondering if you could speak how actually dance is a perfect
Mm-hmm.
match for the work that you do in
Yeah,
EMDR, and
for
how
sure.
it really lends itself to that practice.
I love this question. Such a good question. So, what's interesting for me is in the English language, it's always been peculiar to me that the word avoidance contains the word dance, because so
Mm.
many people that I work with can become very phobic of dance, just like they're very phobic of their feelings, or very phobic of their reactions or their responses. And so I feel that dance, when it is guided in a sensitive way, gives people a vehicle for approaching that edge. And the thing I like about all expressive arts, and you know this as an expressive arts therapist, is because of our multimodal, intermodal focus, it gives people a chance to start with where they have the most comfort. But the modality that they might resist the most is what typically has the most to teach them. And
Mhm.
for so many folks, that's dance. Yet for so many folks, being given permission to dance is what's freeing and wonderful. So even within EMDR clients in therapy, I'm often dealing with folks in two boats, who are one side very intrigued by the fact that I incorporate dance, and other folks who are like, avoidance, avoidance, et cetera, et cetera. So the interesting thing about EMDR therapy, and I've really emphasized this in a lot of my writing about it, is that Dr. Francine Shapiro, who created it, or who is credited with really codifying it and creating it, was a mindfulness practitioner. She had serious mindfulness, mind body study, and as EMDR progressed, I think for the sake of academic credibility, she downplayed a lot of that. But then once
Mm.
I started really studying mindfulness more earnestly for myself, I was able to see just how much mindful content was in what she created in EMDR therapy. So, for example, the phrase in EMDR that's used quite a bit is go with that. When
Mhm.
an emotion, a sensation, an image, when something comes up, you are encouraged to go with it without judgment while the eye movements are applied or some other stimulation is applied. And that's really the heart of how the brain can process and reconsolidate information, is this idea of go with that. There is no doubt to me at this point she got that phrase from her meditation training.
Yeah.
And for example, when we set up a dancing mindfulness practice, whether it's in a group or whether it's one-on-one, what I want to help people get to is this sense of you can go with, or stay with, if that is more appropriate, the natural intelligence of what your body's bringing up in any given moment.
Mm.
And the reason a lot of people can struggle with the practice like dancing mindfulness is I might give people some suggested movements to get them started. but fundamentally it's not a choreographed practice like Zumba or competitive dance. And a lot of people want that. They want to be told exactly what to do. But when
Mm-hmm.
dancing mindfulness, or really any mindfulness practice, is working at its best, you're learning to trust your own judgment about where the body and where the body mind complex needs to go.
Wow. So, how does a dancing mindfulness session
Mm-hmm.
kind of go?
Yeah, it's a great question because in the early days of developing it, I had more of a class setting in mind. And when I initially taught it with folks in the community, with people I worked with at conferences, it was very much a group driven session, like a lot of conscious dance practices would be, where we'd have some kind of warm up, a mindfulness teaching as part of that, and giving people a lot of space to just explore. What's interesting is I rarely teach dancing mindfulness in groups anymore. I mean, I do on retreats at events sometimes. But for me, as I even began to evolve with this practice that I wrote up, it struck me as more of an experience than a class.
Mm,
That you can facilitate dancing mindfulness one on one with folks, that you, as a solo practitioner, can explore how to practice dancing mindfulness in your own personal life. So, a real watershed moment for me was in 2015 when I was contracted to write the book. It was the end of 2014, and then the book was published end of 2015. And the publisher said, "Can you write up what dancing mindfulness would look like for somebody who never has a chance to come to a class?"
mm,
Kind of like a lot of mindfulness books out there are, here is how you can create a self practice, a solo practice at home. And I really embraced the challenge of that. And for example, there's a man whose story we tell in the book, who is a psychologist. He's a friend of mine from the EMDR community. And one day he sent me a message saying, all the posting you've been doing about dance, I was not aware he was following it, but evidently he was. He said, it really encouraged me to start dancing in my kitchen every morning. And here's what I danced to on the last several mornings. And I've realized that adding dance into my morning routine is always a good idea. And that's when my jaw dropped and I got chills. Yes, there is something to this, that dancing mindfulness is more of an experience that you can access in a class or you can access it in your kitchen. And then even in other areas of meditation I teach, and yoga practice has a big emphasis on this, that yes, we think of yoga, especially in the West, as we go to classes, we go to studios, we unroll our mats, we learn these series of poses, and
mm-hmm,
then we go on with the rest of our day. Yet yoga is meant to be practiced every minute of your day,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
because yoga is much more than just the physical practice. That when you take yoga off the mat and into your life, it's about how you respond with life. And in the case of dancing mindfulness, how you might dance with life.
I love that. How you might dance with life.
Let's do that. Let's all do that.
Yeah, no, that is a beautiful way of living. There's nothing better than to be alone in the house with music and moving
Mm-hmm.
around, right? Nobody's watching. That there's that
Yep.
saying, dance like nobody's watching for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of us are really self-conscious about how our
Mm-hmm.
bodies move in space.
Oh, 100%. That's one of the greatest barriers I see to people dancing, or bringing up that dance avoidance thing, that I'm afraid of what people are going to say about me. I'm afraid of how I look. And the reality is that's culturally programmed. Because if
Mm,
you look at any small child in just about any culture I've had exposure to, dance, expression, singing is so natural to them.
mhm,
And
mhm.
I believe that somewhere along the way, we pick up the message that we have to do it well in
Yeah.
order to say that we dance. We
Yes.
have to sing well to say that we can sing. And even as I say that, I never mean to demean or impugn the work of professionals who study this, or people who do have artistic or dance talent.
Mhm.
But I'm always inspired by, so our executive manager at my company, she's a professional dancer. She teaches dance, she performs as a professional. Yet she is a very skilled woman, yet she imparts, when she shares dancing mindfulness practice, when she works with her kids, such this joy for, you all dance. It's all in you. Shed any
Mm-hmm.
messages that it has to be about perfect technique for you
Mm-hmm.
to say that you can dance and for you to really claim dance as your right.
Right. I think that that's true to all of the modalities, whether
Oh,
that's
sure.
visual or music or movement, writing, right? We all have these capabilities, but at some point, because of the cultural expectation for it to be a certain way, we
Yeah.
start to censor ourselves and avoid allowing it to happen.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you ever integrate any of like the bilateral work from EMDR
Hmm.
with the dance that you
Yeah. Well,
do?
dancing, if you're dancing in a certain way, is bilateral.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So you can set up, and I have done this with folks, where the dancing itself or the organic movement that rises up from a person is the dual attention bilateral stimulation that you might use.
mm-hmm,
Sometimes it would be more in preparatory and closure work for EMDR, but I have had some people, when I say go with it and I see that their movement is a nice bilateral pattern that's coming up naturally, maybe we'll pair it with some music and then that will be the bilateral. So there's a lot of
mm.
avenues for combining for sure.
Very cool. Very cool.
And drumming is fantastic bilateral. I mean, I know it's not the dance form expressive art, but we know drumming and music is one of the expressive arts as well. And I've also had sometimes self tapping as a form of drumming, and actually bringing out drums for dual
Mhm.
attention is something that I've done as well.
No, I think that the creative arts definitely pairs with that approach super well in so many different areas. I know therapists that are integrating play based work with
Mm-hmm.
EMDR and obviously with the drumming. And I was thinking dancing. I know there's a lot of people doing like the walk and talk type
Yep.
therapies, right? Which I thought,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that's another way that people are incorporating that type of work as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what is your favorite thing to teach about?
Wow, that's a good question because I like teaching about all the things I teach about.
You teach about a
Oh,
lot.
I do. I do. And I think what unites them all is this idea that transformation is possible,
Mm,
that getting in touch with your emotional life is not anything to be afraid of or be avoided. Because
mhm,
talking where we started this interview about the whole, oh, the word avoidance contains the word dance. The more I have done this work, I'm convinced it is people's fear of feeling what they really feel that is the problem here. That our feelings
mm,
aren't the problem, it's everything we do to try to push them away and stuff them down. And if we can just give ourselves permission to feel it through, the good, the bad, the ugly, to
mhm,
get the support we need either from others around us or through practices to realize, okay, these are just feelings. They're not, they may be big.
right.
I might need some help breaking them down, but they're fundamentally not going to destroy me and I'm not bad for having them.
Mhm,
Because I think
mhm.
that's what so many people carry with them. That
Yeah.
my humanity is somehow bad or flawed.
Mhm,
And so, whether I'm teaching EMDR or expressive arts or some kind of spiritual teaching or yoga, even some of the basic trauma fundamental courses I've been known to teach, I really think that's the common thread in
mhm.
what I impart.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, hopefully we're all kind of working toward that end with our clients, right? To destigmatize and
Mm-hmm.
unpack shame connected with having emotions. Um,
Yes.
yeah, for sure. So I'm really curious about your up and coming book about integrating jujitsu.
Oh, yeah.
Can you start off
So, yeah,
sharing what that is for maybe people that don't know?
sure. So, Jiu-Jitsu is a practice that originated in Japan, one of the Eastern martial arts, which all one way or another can tie to India or China, although Jiu-Jitsu is really credited as a Japanese practice. And it was modified in the 1920s by a bunch of Brazilians as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Some Brazilians who studied Judo and Jiu-Jitsu, both of which are very related Japanese martial arts. And what makes Jiu-Jitsu kind of separate and distinct from some other martial arts you might be aware of is the principle of Jiu-Jitsu is really working with body leverage. So it's not about having a strong body or even necessarily the best technique, but it's how can you move your body in such a way, sometimes in very counterintuitive ways, that can get a very strong person off of you. So a lot of jujitsu is about working with the different ways the body can move to do things that you would have just like pushed through before to try to defend yourself. So as jiu-jitsu, especially Brazilian jiu-jitsu, developed here in the US, there was a lot of self-defense utility seen in it. Especially because Helio Gracie, who was one of the founders of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, was known to be a very small man who was actually sickly in a lot of ways. And he needed to find a way to fight and defend himself where he wasn't relying on his strength. And so Jiu-Jitsu has been seen as a martial art that is especially valuable for women to learn, or people who might be smaller or more vulnerable, even though people of all body types and backgrounds can benefit from Jiu-Jitsu. And I got into it personally about end of 2016, early 2017. My stepsons were studying it at the time. And I was simultaneously intrigued of it and scared of it, because anything that struck me as too violent, I didn't want to be a part of. The idea of rolling around with men, especially on the floor, who were strangers, didn't really appeal to me. And as a feminist, I kind of battled with these whole, well, we shouldn't have to learn self-defense. We should just teach men not to assault us. And yes, that's all true. That's all very true. And I think part of this is like existing in the both and. Until that happens, what can we do to effectively defend ourselves? And so I had two teachers I was very privileged to work with early on. One was a woman who was more of a peer at the studio, who just really encouraged me, like, listen, I get how overwhelming this is. And, you know, I want you to feel comfortable here. And then I had a brilliant coach named Micah Bender, who was a former MMA fighter. And I sat him down saying, listen, I want to do this, but I still have quite a trauma history. And I have this tendency to dissociate when I'm overwhelmed. And even my stepson had said, you have to work with this coach. Like, he's the one who I think will be able to work with you. And so I started taking private lessons. I was eventually able to work my way into group lessons. And I'll tell you, even with all the healing I had at that point, all the EMDR, all the other methods, all the yoga practice, there was something about jiu-jitsu that got at another part of it that literally helped me to get somebody dangerous off of me. And it was through jiu-jitsu practice I was able to leave a pretty toxic marriage I was in at the time. And I had a lot of shame about that. I had a lot of shame of, you know, how did I, a trauma specialist, even marry this person in the first place and get into this situation in the first place? And I mean, so case in point, here in my office, I ended up taking a belt test in jiu-jitsu. It's a special women's empowered belt that one of the major jiu-jitsu schools has. And I took it. It was a timed test. I had to do all of these moves with Micah in 10 minutes. And I have it hanging underneath my PhD in my office, because getting my PhD was something I knew I could do. I never thought at my, like in my late 30s when I did this, that I would have the ability to take any kind of athletic test. And I did, and I passed it, and it was just a game changer for me. And so the person I'm companioning with on this book is a woman named Anna Perkel, who is a much more advanced jiu-jitsu practitioner than I am from a physical perspective. She's really kind of kept going the whole way through the belt system. And I unfortunately just train a little bit here and there because of an injury I'm still dealing with. And long story short, Anna and I met because she heard me talk about jiu-jitsu on a podcast and reached out to me. And we just began this brilliant friendship and collaboration. And so we paired on this book together, and she really shared she's also a clinician, and she was really responsible for authoring the lion's share of the jiu-jitsu content. I came in more from the voice of the trauma specialist. And then there was a
Mhm.
lot of vice versa we did as well in certain places. So I'm really happy with this book because I think it will be a guide for jiu-jitsu schools and teachers. It will be a
Mm.
guide for clinicians on how they could work with specifically jiu-jitsu, but really a lot of martial arts collaborations in the community, because there is something about getting in there and physically engaging with
Mhm.
that thing that scares you
Yeah.
that has a real magic here for helping us shift how
Mhm.
traumatic memories are stored in the brain.
Right. I think, before you even said the belt was for, empowered,
Yeah.
that was the term that was coming to me, that it is an empowering experience to be able to learn
Mm-hmm.
how to take care of yourself, and particularly for people who've been in situations where they've not been able to protect themselves, how
Mm-hmm.
transformational that could be for them.
Yes. You said it all right there. I have nothing else to add.
And so that book is coming out in
March of
2022.
March of 2022. March of 2022. Yeah.
Wow. Very cool. And I'm wondering, the the particular trainer that you were working with, um, if you
Mm-hmm.
consulted with him as you were kind of creating the book
Oh
and
yeah.
like reflecting upon, yeah, very cool.
Oh yeah. He's interviewed for the book, and yeah, he's like family to me.
It's amazing. I did take jujitsu a long, long, long time ago, and I was probably in my early 20s or so. And it definitely
Mm-hmm.
was intimidating, especially being the only female. And like you said, all these
Mm-hmm.
guys and like being on the mat and stuff. But there was a lot of great learning lessons, and I'd be really interested to see how you're connecting that with the trauma and recovery work.
Thanks for your interest in that. Yes, because the book, Anna and I really rose to the challenge of writing it for three audiences, for just general practitioners or people who might be interested in developing a jiu-jitsu practice, and then as well for instructors and for clinicians or therapists on how we can
Mhm.
all work collaboratively.
Very cool. So I know you're going to be teaching again this year at the Expressive Therapy Summit. And I'm wondering what you're
Yes.
going to be teaching about there.
So I am being joined by a collaborator who started as a student named Nikki Allen, and we will be doing just a basic session on an introduction to dancing mindfulness as a practice experience, what you and I were discussing at the beginning of this interview. So, what's really cool about this is I actually met Nikki through the Expressive Therapy Summit back in 2016. I That was the year that we tried doing the dancing mindfulness training as part of like a multi-day track in the summit,
Hmm.
and Nikki was one of my students during that, and she really took to it very strongly. And she's now a collaborator with my company, Institute for Creative Mindfulness, and she's taught dancing mindfulness trainings now herself, and she's doing her doctoral research project on it.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, it's a very full circle moment that she and I are presenting at the summit together on really helping people explore what dancing mindfulness means and how they can turn it into a practice experience.
Hmm. Very cool. And is that going to be online, or are you going to be physically at the event in New Jersey?
It'll be online.
Online.
We'll be online, yes.
Okay. Awesome. Are there any other events that you're going to be teaching at within the next few months?
Oh, I have a lot of events that
A
I'm
lot of
involved with.
events.
So the easiest way people can look at my full calendar is to go to my website, jamiemarich.com. And under the calendar, we have events there that I'm doing through our company, Institute for Creative Mindfulness, and also invited presentations. So I believe an outside entity is hosting me for Intro to Expressive Arts Therapy in December. Irene Rodriguez, another collaborator of mine, and I were doing a day retreat in December that my company
Ooh.
is hosting called Life, the Path of Meditation. And that might be one that some of your listeners find interesting, really looking at this idea that there are so many different ways to connect with a meditative state, and many of them are expressive.
Yeah, definitely. I think, um, oh my goodness, I always mess up his name, Mahali, um, and then something, and his last part of his name is Mahali, who studied flow. He unfortunately recently passed, maybe a couple of weeks
Yes, I know
ago.
who you mean, and I have to look that up. I didn't realize he passed.
Yeah. I'm terrible at pronouncing his name, but that that flow state, right? That to
Right,
me feels like a meditative state. Like if I'm
for sure.
just meditating, not engaging in the creative practice, that's what it feels like.
Hmm.
But then if I'm creating and I get into that space or that zone where there is no time,
Hmm.
there's no space, it just is in the moment, like that too, that feels like that meditative practice. Um, what kinds of approaches will you be exploring?
Yeah, so for example, we will be looking at kind of traditional sitting meditation as well as using visual artwork as a way to meditate, using dance as a way to meditate, using chant as a way to meditate. So
Mm,
those are the main practices we'll be focusing on, and also discussing this idea that all life gives us an opportunity to meditate. Waiting in line at the store may be your best chance to practice meditation in a given day to really work with the mindful attitude of patience.
mm.
So
Yep, that's true.
those kind of discussions. Yep.
Beautiful. That's wonderful. If people wanted to find out more about your training institute, where
Yes.
can they find that information?
Right. So I know you're going to put all these in the show notes. So don't worry, folks, if you don't get all the websites. Institute for Creative Mindfulness is the name of my company. So you can go to instituteforcreativemindfulness.com.
Okay.
And all of our trainings are listed there in expressive arts therapy, in EMDR therapy. We've now been able to move the EMDR therapy training model online. So we have programs starting every month if you want to jump in and get a real kind of mindfulness friendly
Mm-hmm.
approach to the EMDR therapy training. I also mentioned my personal website,
Yes.
jamiemarich.com. On that calendar, you can see where I'm teaching on a lot of outside entities, not just Institute for Creative Mindfulness. Two other websites I can recommend. We also have one set up for Dancing Mindfulness, which is simply dancingmindfulness.com. So there's a bit more dance specific content on that site in addition to a listing of some of our trainings. And then another resources site that I keep is called traumamadesimple.com. And that has basically everything I've done for free that's online. You can link it at that site. And I designed it to be very client friendly, not just for clinicians. So, for example, we have trauma informed yoga sequences on there, meditations, yoga nidras, links to some of the dance videos, links to some of my EMDR demonstrations. So, there's plenty of ways to engage with me online.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And if anybody listening is interested in attending Jamie's training at the Expressive Therapy Summit, you can head over to expressivetherapysummit.com and you'll find a way to register for that there. Um, I am so grateful for you making the time to speak with me today. And I just want to thank you very much.
My great pleasure. Thank you for the beautiful questions, and I hope all your listeners have taken something from it.
I hope so too. Well, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Jamie. I really loved at the end where she shared about being able to practice meditation every day, no matter what circumstance or scenario you're in. And I think many people could probably benefit from learning to meditate while standing in line. That was her example. Yeah, that's probably true. And again, if you're interested in learning more about her approach to dancing mindfulness and how to integrate that in your personal practice, um, you can learn more about it in the introductory class that she's going to be teaching at the Expressive Therapy Summit at the end of the month on November 20th. And she's going to be teaching it with her former student, Nikki Allen. And you can sign up by heading over to the Summit website, which is www.expressivetherapysummit.com. And if this is your first time hearing the podcast, then you haven't heard me like really brag about the summit event, but I think it's one of the premier and best expressive arts based conferences of its kind. It's super experiential. The presenters that train at the conference are always of extremely high caliber and accomplished in the field. And I know every time that I attend, I always leave with tangible information, either additional education or tangible interventions that I can put into my practice right away. So if you haven't attended before, I really encourage you to check it out. Look at the program. There's everything from play therapy, sand therapy, um, dance therapy, music therapy, of course, art therapy, and a lot of intermodal disciplines as well, expressive writing. This year, of course, they have a whole track. That is going to be bilingual, English and Spanish translated. And those presenters are all from Latin America and presenting on their work. So it's a really exciting opportunity to attend this year's event. And anyway, till next time, take good care, and I will talk at you soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Creative Psychotherapist. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For show notes, downloads, and additional resources, head over to the website at www.creativeclinicianscorner.com.